Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take really dense, complex subjects and try to make them something you can actually use.
Yeah.
Today, we are tackling fuel metabolism, how our organs and our hormones work together to make sure our bodies have the energy they need.
Right.
We're looking at a section from a biochemistry textbook today, okay?
Okay.
It's kind of like an owner's manual for your metabolism.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating system. Like if you think of the body as like a bustling city with
Okay.
all these different organs playing specialized roles in producing and storing and using different types of fuel.
So different organs have different energy needs and preferences, I guess?
Absolutely. So, for instance, your brain,
Okay.
the control center of your body,
Right.
it runs almost exclusively on glucose.
Really?
It gobbles up about 120 grams of glucose a day.
Wow, that's a lot. What happens if it doesn't get enough glucose?
Even a small dip in blood glucose can impair brain function. It's a high-maintenance organ with no real energy reserves of its own.
That makes sense.
But luckily, our bodies have a backup plan.
Oh.
During fasting or starvation, the brain can adapt to using ketone bodies as an alternative fuel source.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Our bodies are so resourceful.
They are.
What about the other organs? Do they all rely on glucose as much as the brain?
Not at all. Take muscles, for example.
Okay.
They're much more versatile. They can use glucose, fatty acids, and even ketone bodies,
Wow.
depending on what you're doing.
Hmm.
During exercise, muscles primarily burn glucose,
Okay.
but when they're working really hard and oxygen is limited, they produce lactate,
Right.
which is then shuttled to the liver to be converted back into glucose.
Like our bodies have their own internal recycling program.
Exactly. And then we have the heart,
Okay.
the tireless worker pumping nonstop to keep blood circulating.
Yeah.
It needs a constant supply of fuel, and thankfully it's not picky.
Mm.
The heart can use fatty acids, glucose, lactate, and even ketone bodies to keep going.
So the heart is fueled by an all-star team of energy sources.
It is.
What about the liver? The liver seems like it's playing a really crucial role in all of this energy management.
The liver is like the central hub, constantly synthesizing, storing, and distributing fuel components.
Mm.
It's also a master at buffering blood glucose levels.
Oh, okay.
It has specialized enzymes like hexokinase IV and a glucose transporter called GLUT2 that help it fine-tune glucose uptake and release.
It sounds like the liver is working overtime to keep our blood sugar stable.
Yeah, it's a busy organ, for sure.
So how does the body actually regulate this whole fuel management system?
Well, that's where hormones come in.
Okay.
They act like messengers, coordinating this intricate metabolic dance.
Hormones, the body's tiny but powerful messengers. Okay, tell me more.
Well, you've got insulin,
Okay.
which is released when blood glucose levels rise, like after a meal. Insulin signals to muscles and adipose tissue to take up glucose and store it for later.
So insulin's basically telling the body, hey, we've got plenty of fuel, let's stock up.
Exactly. And then there's glucagon, the counterpart to insulin.
Okay.
When blood glucose levels drop, glucagon tells the liver to release glucose from its glycogen stores and ramp up glucose production.
So insulin and glucagon are working in opposition, kind of like a carefully balanced seesaw to maintain that blood glucose equilibrium.
Precisely. And then you have epinephrine, the fight or flight hormone. It's released during stressful situations
Okay.
and act very quickly to mobilize fuel for immediate action.
So epinephrine is like the emergency responder, ready to jump in when we need a quick energy boost.
Exactly. But there's another level of control that acts at the cellular level. These fascinating protein kinases called AMPK and mTOR. Think of them as the energy sensors within each cell.
Okay, so let's break this down. What do AMPK and mTOR actually do?
AMPK gets activated when the cell's energy levels are low, like during exercise or fasting. It's like a little alarm bell going off saying, hey, we need more energy.
So AMPK is the low fuel warning light. What happens when that's triggered?
When AMPK is activated, it sets off a cascade of events to increase energy production and conserve existing stores. It boosts glucose uptake and fatty acid oxidation, while simultaneously inhibiting energy-consuming processes like the synthesis of fatty acids and cholesterol.
So AMPK really flips a switch, shifting the cell from energy storage to energy production mode. So what about mTOR? What's its role in all of this?
mTOR, on the other hand, thrives in nutrient-rich conditions. It's the driving force behind cell growth and biosynthesis,
Okay.
making sure your body builds new proteins and molecules when you have plenty of resources available.
So when we're well fed, mTOR takes charge, encouraging our cells to grow and flourish.
Exactly. mTOR is all about abundance and growth, while AMPK steps in when resources are scarce, promoting conservation and efficiency.
This is incredible. These two kinases are like yin and yang,
Yeah.
working together to keep our cells humming along smoothly. But it doesn't even stop there. Our textbook also talks about this fascinating family of enzymes called sirtuins
Yeah.
that seem to be involved in regulating these pathways as well.
Ah, sirtuins. They are truly fascinating. They play a wide range of roles in the cell, from regulating gene expression to influencing lifespan.
Wow.
When it comes to energy homeostasis, sirtuins act as sensors of the cellular redox state. They respond to the balance of oxidized and reduced molecules in the cell, which gives them a clue about the overall energy status.
So sirtuins are like cellular detectives, picking up on subtle clues about the cell's energy balance. What do they do with that information?
One key sirtuin, called SIRT-T1,
Okay.
plays a crucial role in regulating a transcriptional coactivator known as PGC1-alpha.
Transcriptional coactivator. That sounds pretty complex. What does that even mean?
Think of PGC1-alpha as a volume knob for certain genes involved in fuel metabolism.
Okay.
SIRT-T1 can fine-tune the activity of PGC1-alpha, which then influences the expression of those genes, either turning their activity up or down.
So SIRT-T1 can adjust the volume of fuel metabolism genes,
Right.
ensuring they're playing at the right level for the situation. But how does this system respond to different metabolic states, like fasting?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a crucial point: the body's response to metabolic stress. During fasting, the ratio of NAD+ to NADH in the cell increases, which activates SIRT-T1.
So fasting shifts the cellular balance, giving SRT1 the signal to step up its activity. What happens next?
Well, this activated SRT1 then goes to work, deacetylating and activating PGC1-alpha, setting off a cascade of metabolic adaptations.
What kind of adaptations?
In the liver, the activation of PGC1-alpha ramps up gluconeogenesis, helping maintain those crucial blood glucose levels for the brain.
Okay.
Meanwhile, in muscles and the heart, it promotes fatty acid oxidation, shifting those tissues away from glucose dependence.
Amazing. It's like the body reorchestrates its entire fuel symphony during fasting, making sure the brain gets its glucose while other organs learn to rely on fat for energy. But this delicate system could be thrown off balance, right? Our textbook mentions diabetes as a prime example of metabolic stress.
Absolutely. Diabetes, whether type 1 or type 2, throws a wrench into this finely tuned system, leading to what's often called starvation in the midst of plenty.
Starvation in the midst of plenty. That sounds almost paradoxical.
It is. In diabetes, there's plenty of glucose in the bloodstream, but the cells can't utilize it effectively. It's like having a pantry full of food, but being unable to open the door.
So even though there's plenty of glucose around, the cells are essentially starving because they can't access it.
Precisely. And this leads to a cascade of metabolic problems. Since the cells can't utilize glucose effectively, the liver tries to compensate by ramping up gluconeogenesis even further, which just adds to the problem.
Sounds like a vicious cycle.
It is, and to make matters worse, the body starts breaking down fat and protein for fuel since it can't access the glucose.
Right.
This leads to weight loss and the accumulation of ketone bodies, which can cause a dangerous condition called ketoacidosis.
This is all so incredibly intricate. We've covered a lot of ground, from how different organs have specialized metabolic roles to how hormones like insulin, glucagon, and epinephrine orchestrate fuel management. We even dove into the fascinating world of cellular energy sensors like AMPK and mTOR and those intricate sirtuins.
Yeah.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, next we can take a closer look at the different types of diabetes and how they specifically impact this delicate metabolic balance.
That sounds like a great place to pick up when we come back for part 2. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we were exploring this incredible system our bodies have for managing energy even when we're fasting.
Yeah, it really is remarkable how our organs can cooperate and adapt to use different fuel sources depending on the situation.
Right. And you mentioned how this balance can be disrupted in conditions like diabetes.
Right.
Our source material goes into the different types of diabetes and the specific challenges they present. I'm curious to kind of dive deeper into that.
Absolutely. Let's start with type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
It's often diagnosed in childhood, and it arises from the body's inability to produce insulin.
So in this case, the signal to store fuel is essentially missing.
Precisely. Without insulin, cells can't effectively take up glucose from the bloodstream.
Right.
Which leads to high blood sugar levels.
And that's when those serious complications we talked about earlier, like ketoacidosis, can occur.
Exactly. The body, sensing this lack of usable glucose, starts breaking down fat and protein for fuel. This leads to a buildup of ketone bodies in the blood, which can be very dangerous.
It's almost like the body is stuck in a perpetual state of fasting, even if the person is eating.
That's a great way to put it. Unfortunately, the only treatment for type 1 diabetes is regular insulin injections to replace what the body can't produce on its own.
Makes sense. What about type 2 diabetes? We briefly touched on insulin resistance earlier. Can you explain that a bit more?
Of course. Type 2 diabetes, which is often linked to obesity and lifestyle factors, is a bit more complex.
So in this case, the body's producing insulin, but the cells aren't responding to it properly.
Exactly. It's like the cells have become desensitized to insulin's message over time, making it much harder for glucose to enter.
So even though insulin is present, it's not effectively telling the cells to take up glucose.
That's the crux of it. This resistance leads to a gradual rise in blood sugar levels, which, if left unmanaged, can eventually cause the same complications as type 1 diabetes.
This raises an important question then. What causes this insulin resistance in the first place?
That's a question researchers are still actively investigating, but several factors seem to contribute.
Like obesity you mentioned earlier.
Yes, obesity is strongly correlated with insulin resistance, and our source material highlights two main hypotheses that attempt to explain this connection.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear about these.
The first is the lipid overload hypothesis. It suggests that when excess fat accumulates in muscle cells, it can actually interfere with the insulin signaling pathway. It's almost like the fat is clogging up the communication lines, preventing insulin's message from getting through.
That's a great analogy. What about the second hypothesis?
The second one is the inflammation hypothesis. It proposes that as fat cells grow larger, they release inflammatory molecules that can also disrupt insulin signaling.
So in this case, it's the inflammation, rather than the fat itself, that's interfering with insulin's message.
Precisely. And it's likely that both of these mechanisms are at play in the development of insulin resistance, ultimately contributing to type 2 diabetes.
This is fascinating, but also a bit concerning. It makes you think that our modern lifestyles, with an abundance of food and often less physical activity, might be setting the stage for these problems.
You've hit on a crucial point. Our bodies have evolved to handle periods of both feast and famine. However, the constant abundance of food in modern society, coupled with sedentary habits, can overload the system.
Right. It's like we're constantly sending those fed state signals, which could be contributing to this desensitization we've been talking about.
Exactly. That's why lifestyle interventions, such as diet and exercise, are so crucial for managing type 2 diabetes.
So these interventions are essentially helping to resensitize the cells to insulin.
Precisely. By reducing calorie intake and increasing physical activity, we can reduce the burden on the system, allowing insulin to work more effectively.
This makes so much sense. It really highlights how understanding these intricacies of our metabolism can empower us to make more informed choices about our health.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our own bodies. We've covered the different types of diabetes in detail.
Right.
Now our source material also mentions another metabolic stress, starvation.
Right. While less common in developed countries, starvation still presents a significant challenge to our metabolic balance. It's a situation where the body has to get creative to keep functioning.
Exactly. When food intake is severely restricted, our bodies undergo remarkable changes to conserve energy and prioritize vital organs. This brings us back to that amazing adaptability we talked about earlier.
Like how the brain, which relies so heavily on glucose, manages to stay fueled when glucose supplies are dwindling.
Precisely. As glucose becomes scarce, the liver starts producing ketone bodies from the breakdown of stored fat.
And if I remember correctly, the brain can actually use these ketone bodies as an alternative fuel, which spares the limited glucose for other essential processes.
You're absolutely right. It's an incredible adaptation that allows the body to survive for extended periods without food. It shows just how resilient our metabolic system truly is.
This all paints such a vivid picture of how carefully our bodies manage energy resources. It really is a delicate balancing act, influenced by hormones, enzymes, and even our own lifestyle choices.
You've captured the essence beautifully. And as we delve deeper into biochemistry, we continue to uncover more about the elegance and complexity of these systems.
Okay, we've spent a good amount of time talking about AMPK and mTOR, those crucial kinases that regulate energy balance. We've also seen how sirtuins act as sensors of the cellular redox state. But I'm still curious about how all these players communicate and coordinate their actions. What's the bigger picture here?
That's a fantastic question. It leads us to the concept of endocrine regulation, which is the intricate network of hormones that fine-tune our metabolism. Think of hormones as messengers traveling throughout the body, carrying crucial information and instructions to different tissues.
So it's like a sophisticated communication system with hormones acting as the couriers.
Precisely. And at the heart of this system lies the brain, specifically a region called the hypothalamus.
Ah, the hypothalamus. We often hear about it in relation to things like hunger and satiety.
You're right. The hypothalamus is like the control center for appetite and energy balance.
Okay.
It's constantly receiving information from various parts of the body, including including the gut, adipose tissue, and even the liver. It's always gathering intel on our energy levels and nutrient stores.
So the hypothalamus is constantly monitoring our internal state.
Exactly. Based on this information, the hypothalamus orchestrates a symphony of hormonal responses to maintain equilibrium. And guess what? AMPK and mTOR play key roles in this hypothalamic control center as well.
Wow. They really are master regulators. So how do they fit into this picture?
Well, AMPK in the hypothalamus acts as a fuel gauge.
Okay.
When energy stores are low, AMPK is activated and sends out signals that increase appetite and encourage us to eat.
So AMPK in the brain is like that low fuel warning light we talked about. But instead of switching to energy production, it's telling us to go out and refuel by eating.
Exactly. On the other hand, mTOR in the hypothalamus is more like a satiety signal. When we're well fed, mTOR is activated, signaling to the brain that we're satisfied and can stop eating.
So AMPK pushes us to eat, while mTOR tells us we've had enough. It's like they're having this constant conversation in our brains to regulate our appetite.
Precisely. And this intricate interplay is further fine-tuned by a whole cast of hormones, each with its own role to play in the energy balance drama.
Like insulin and leptin, which we've already discussed.
Yes, insulin released after a meal not only promotes glucose uptake in tissues, but also acts on the hypothalamus, signaling satiety and inhibiting food intake.
Sounds like insulin is a real multitasker, working both at the cellular level and in the brain. What about leptin?
Leptin, the hormone released by fat cells, also acts on the hypothalamus.
Okay.
It signals that energy stores are sufficient and suppresses appetite.
So leptin is basically saying, hey, brain, we've got plenty of fat stored down here, no need to eat more.
Exactly. But this system can go awry, especially in cases of obesity. Sometimes the hypothalamus becomes resistant to leptin's signals, leading to a diminished sense of satiety and an increased drive to eat.
Oh, so leptin resistance is like insulin resistance, but in the brain. It disrupts the normal feedback loop that regulates appetite.
Precisely, and this can contribute to a vicious cycle of overeating and weight gain. But leptin and insulin aren't the only hormones involved in this hypothalamic control center. There's also ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone.
Ghrelin, I've definitely heard of that one. Isn't that the hormone that makes our stomachs growl when we're hungry?
That's the one. Ghrelin, produced primarily in the stomach, acts on the hypothalamus, stimulating appetite and promoting food intake. It's essentially leptin's counterpart.
So ghrelin is saying, hey, brain, I'm empty down here. Time to eat. While leptin is saying, hold your horses, we've got plenty of fuel stored. They're sending opposite messages.
You got it. And then there's adiponectin, another hormone released by fat cells.
Okay.
Unlike leptin, adiponectin actually increases insulin sensitivity and promotes energy expenditure.
So adiponectin is like the good guy, helping insulin do its job and encouraging us to burn energy.
Exactly. Unfortunately, adiponectin levels tend to decrease in obesity, further contributing to that metabolic imbalance.
This is also fascinating. It's amazing how these hormones, along with key kinases like AMPK and mTOR, orchestrate this complex symphony of metabolic regulation. And it's all centered in the hypothalamus, this tiny but powerful region of the brain.
It really is a remarkable system, highlighting the incredible interconnectedness of our bodies. And as we continue to explore the world of biochemistry, we'll uncover even more about these fascinating regulatory networks.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into hormonal regulation.
It's been quite a journey. We've explored everything from the metabolic roles of different organs to the intricate interplay of hormones and key enzymes.
Right, we've seen how our bodies maintain this delicate balance of energy even when faced with challenges like fasting or diabetes.
And we've uncovered how the brain, particularly the hypothalamus, acts as a central command center, orchestrating this whole metabolic symphony.
It's been fascinating to see how the hypothalamus receives input from all over the body and then sends out hormonal signals to fine-tune our metabolism.
Precisely. Those signals are carried by an impressive cast of hormones, each with its own unique role to play.
We've talked about insulin, glucagon, epinephrine, leptin, ghrelin, and adiponectin, just to name a few. It's remarkable how these hormones can act on different tissues, sometimes even having opposing effects, all in an effort to maintain that delicate balance.
It really highlights the incredible complexity and sophistication of our endocrine system.
But amidst all this complexity, are there any overarching themes or principles that can help us make sense of it all? Is there a way to simplify this intricate web of interactions?
That's a great question. It leads us to a fascinating concept, the duality of our metabolism.
Duality of metabolism. That sounds intriguing. What does it mean?
Our bodies have evolved to handle two fundamental metabolic states, animalism and cataclysm.
Okay, I remember those terms from biology class. Animalism is about building up, and capitalism is about breaking down.
Exactly. Anabolism is the process of synthesizing complex molecules from simpler ones, which requires energy. It's like the construction phase of metabolism. We're building new tissues, storing energy, and growing.
So anabolism is what's happening when we're well-fed and our bodies are humming along, building and storing for the future.
Precisely. Catabolism, on the other hand, is the breakdown of complex molecules into simpler ones, releasing energy in the process. It's like the demolition phase, where we're mobilizing stored fuel, breaking down old tissues, and generating energy to keep everything running.
So catabolism kicks in when we're fasting or exercising, providing our cells with the fuel they need.
Exactly. These two processes, anabolism and catalysm, are constantly in flux, responding to our internal state and environmental cues. It's a dynamic dance between building up and breaking down.
A delicate dance to maintain that essential balance. I'm starting to see how the hormone that we've been discussing fit into this. Some hormones must promote anabolism while others favor catabolism, right?
Precisely. Insulin, for instance, is a potent anabolic hormone. It promotes glucose uptake, glycogen synthesis, protein synthesis, and fat storage. Think of it as the foreman of the construction crew, directing resources towards building and storing.
So insulin is all about growth and abundance, making sure we make the most of those nutrients when they're available.
Exactly. Glucagon, its counterpart, is a catabolic hormone. It promotes the breakdown of glycogen, the production of glucose, and the breakdown of fat, mobilizing stored fuel to meet energy demands.
So if insulin is the construction foreman, glucagon is the demolition expert, breaking things down when we need energy.
That's a great way to put it. And remember epinephrine, our fight-or-flight hormone, it also falls into the catabolic camp. It works very quickly to mobilize glucose and fatty acids, preparing the body for action.
So epinephrine is all about immediate energy, providing that rapid fuel boost for intense bursts of activity. This duality of metabolism is a really helpful framework. It even helps me understand those key kinases we discussed earlier, AMPK and mTOR.
Absolutely. AMPK, which is activated when cellular energy is low, promotes catabolic processes and inhibits anabolic ones. It's like the energy conservation officer, shutting down unnecessary construction projects and prioritizing essential demolition to get us through those lean times.
And mTOR, which thrives in nutrient-rich conditions, promotes anabolic processes and inhibits catabolic ones.
Precisely. It's like the growth and development coordinator, making sure those construction projects are in full swing when we have plenty of resources. It's all about maximizing growth and expansion when times are good.
Wow, this interplay between anabolic and catabolic processes, all orchestrated by hormones and those key enzymes, is really remarkable. It allows our bodies to adapt to such a wide range of situations.
It's a constant tug of war between building and breaking down, constantly adjusting to maintain that critical equilibrium.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. We've journeyed through this intricate world of hormonal regulation, from the roles of different organs to the central command of the hypothalamus. We've seen how hormones, enzymes, and even our lifestyle choices influence this delicate balance, tipping the scales towards animalism or catalysm.
It really is like a grand symphony, with hormones conducting a metabolic orchestra, making sure every cell gets the fuel it needs precisely when it needs it.
What an amazing system. To my listeners, I encourage you to think about this duality of metabolism. Consider the choices you make each day and how they might be influencing this balance in your own body.
Remember, even small changes in diet and exercise can have a profound impact on your metabolic health.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into hormonal regulation.
We hope you've gained a new appreciation for the complexity and resilience of your own body. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of biochemistry.